Wagner, a documentary study edited by Herbert Barth, Dietrich Mack, Egon Voss. If you don't know, Wagner, the name is spelled W-A-G-N-E-R, like Wagner, but I believe it's pronounced Wagner. He's a classic opera composer, probably most famous for that Flight of the Valkyries. You know, the one they play in Apocalypse Now? Dun 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 dun. Sorry, that's the only time I'm going to sing in this video, I promise. But you recognize that, right? A famous 19th century opera composer. Now, I'm going to admit right up front that I am not really interested in classical music per se, and that very limited understanding of music. I am interested in the 19th century, though, and that's what kind of draws me to this book. Is I'm interested in finding out more about the interesting figures in the 19th century. I'm a history nerd, and this is kind of the period I'm drawn to. Now, Wagner he had a very interesting personality. Politically. So he was part of the revolutions of 1848. I've talked about the revolutions of 1848 in previous book reviews. He was a revolutionary. He was on the barricades in Dresden with none other than Mikhail Bakunin. They were, I guess, on the barricades side by side. Mikhail Bakunin is a Russian anarchist, kind of looked at as the forefather of modern anarchist political theory. So that's quite interesting. But from what I just said, you get the impression that Wagner was kind of quite progressive and liberal and kind of, progressive and liberal. But he actually had a not so progressive side to him. He's been associated with anti-Semitism. Because of his anti-Semitism, because he was German, I guess, his music was very popular with the Nazis. And I heard somewhere on the internet, I'm going to have to look this up or something, that to this day there's an informal ban on his music in Israel now because it had been so popular with the Germans and with the Nazis, and maybe even, did I read this right? It had been played in the Holocaust camps. Sorry, some of this review isn't as well researched as it could have been, but these are my impressions. These are things I've heard somewhere. So that to me sounds like there's an interesting life in there, even for somebody like me who doesn't really understand music so much. The politics of Wagner's life sound very interesting. The other thing I'd be quite interested in is Wagner is quite famous for his Ring Cycle, which is like a 9-hour epic opera that's split into several different nights about this Norse mythology. And you've seen this satirized before, with the operas with the Viking hats and, the fat lady singing with the Viking horns. This gets satirized all the time in Looney Tunes. Those are Wagner's operas. And I'm quite a mythology nerd. I don't know much about Norse mythology, but I'm into that kind of stuff. And it fascinates me, and I would really like to learn more about it. But I don't want to sit through all 9 hours of German opera. Like I want to find a book that gives me a summary of the themes of what's happening, because I do find it fascinating. And I think somebody correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems like Tolkien is generally credited with creating the modern fantasy genre, and Tolkien drew from Norse mythology. It seems like maybe Wagner should get some of that credit as well, because Wagner was popularizing Norse mythology before Tolkien did. So, I wonder how much influence there is there in the creation of the modern fantasy genre. So for all of those reasons, I would be quite interested in finding a good biography of Wagner that got into some of this stuff without getting too technical about his music stuff. And for a period, I was trying hard to track this down. You know, I was going on Amazon. Every time I was in a bookstore, I would go to the biography sections. And I didn't really find anything. On Amazon, I found books that were analyzing his music. And I did find some books that were analyzing his politics, but I didn't find like a proper biography, which is what I would be more interested in. And then I was in the Oita Prefectural Library in Japan, and I found this on the shelves. Now this is from 1975, so you probably won't find it in your local bookstore, but I mean, who knows? You might find it in your library. Otherwise, I'm sure you could track down a used copy on Amazon or something like that. By the way, this is one of my old book reviews, when I go back and read something that I wrote years ago on the blog. I mention that because in the years since, I did actually see a proper biography of Wagner on the bookstores a couple years back. And I'm kicking myself for not buying it. But at the time I thought, I'm done with Wagner. I'm interested in other stuff now. So I didn't actually pick it up. But it presumably is out there somewhere. Somebody let me know if you have any good books to recommend to me. Anyways, this particular book is not a biography. It's a collection of authentic documents related to Wagner. So yeah, it's newspaper articles that Wagner wrote. It's letters Wagner wrote to his friends, letters his friends wrote back, some of the letters that his friends wrote about him to other people, you know, people gossiping about him to third parties, and diary entries. And it's, I mean, as the title suggests, the title is a documentary study. The editors just take all these and they put them into one binding, so you can kind of read through the authentic documents yourself if you're interested enough. It sounds pretty cool, and I will admit that there are a few highlights here. So the section on the 1848 Revolution contains a reprint of Wagner's newspaper editorial, Revolution, from 1848. As well as Wagner's own account of what happened during the Dresden Uprising. And Mikhail Bakunin, the famous Russian anarchist I mentioned earlier, it's got his appraisal of Wagner. And I don't now remember exactly what form that took. I want to say it was like the interview he gave to the police after he had been arrested. But I don't actually remember it well enough to say now. And I did learn interesting bits and pieces about Wagner's life from this book. But it was a poor substitute for a biography. It was just a series of documents, and there was no coherent narrative. There were several gaps in which I just had to guess at what had been happening. Moreover, most of Wagner's letters, which are included here, have to do with him talking about the techniques of music, which were right over my head because I'm not a musical person. So it wasn't appreciated by an unmusical person like me, but your mileage may vary. If you're more interested in musical technique, then you may find that stuff interesting. I've got to confess, I didn't really find this book enjoyable at all. There were some highlights, but overall, I found it a little bit boring. I did, for whatever it's worth, trudge through the whole thing from beginning to end. I figured it would be good for me to just train my attention span to concentrate on stuff. But so often, when you're reading something and you get to the end of the page and you're like, my mind was just wandering. I wasn't paying attention to anything I'm reading. And then you go back up to the top of the page and make yourself read it again. Yeah, it was totally one of those books for me. Some interesting parts, but overall, a lot of stuff that was not interesting. But, I don't know. Your mileage may vary, and probably this isn't a book that's meant to be read cover to cover anyways. I mean, probably this is like a series of authentic documents for people who want to use it in their research or something. Anyways, like I said, it's a 1975 book. I found it in the library, which is probably where you would find it. I don't think it's being currently printed anymore. Let me know if you come across it.